Welcome to the section, Network Internals and Pre-trained Models. We begin with the first video, Visualizing and Analyzing Network. Let's visualize training with TensorBoard. We will show you how to use TensorBoard with TensorFlow when classifying fashion MNIST. Let's start by importing TensorFlow and a tool to load MNIST datasets. Here on this line, we will specify the fashion MNIST dataset and load it. After that, we will create the placeholders for the input data. Before we specify our network architecture, we will define a couple of functions we will be using multiple times in our model. We will start with a function that creates and initializes the weights. Then, we will create a similar function for the bias. In our architecture, we will be using multiple convolutional blocks that include a max pooling layer using these lines of code. Next, we will define our complete network architecture. We will be using 3 convolutional blocks followed by 2 fully connected layers. Next, we need to extract cross-entropy using this code snippet. We will be using Atom Optimizer during training with a learning rate of 0.001 using these lines of code. To track the progress, we want to extract the accuracy using these lines of code. Now, we will create an interactive TensorFlow session. Now, let's set up the summary writers for TensorFlow that we will be using for TensorBoard. Next, we will define some hyperparameters before we start training. Finally, we will start training with this block of code. As you can see, our training is completed. Here, we can check the training which is in orange and validation which is in blue after the generated epoch. You can also view a graph generated on the TensorBoard. This is an example of TensorBoard graph visualization. Now, analyze network weights and more. We start by importing TensorFlow along with the MNIST dataset. Now, we will be able to load the fashion MNIST dataset with just one line of code. Before proceeding, we need to set the placeholders for our model using this block of code. Now, we will define 4 functions that will help us build our network architecture. To write the statistics to TensorBoard, we define a function that extracts these values. Next, we will define our network architecture with this code snippet. For the first 2 convolutional blocks, we want to extract the weights and statistics during training. We do it using this block of code. For the remaining layers, we don't store any information using this code snippet. However, we do store the cross-entropy and accuracy with these lines of code. Let's set the learning rate and define our optimizer. Let's set up a session and create our file writers. Next, we define our hyperparameters. Now, we will train our models and store the results. Once your training is completed, we can check TensorBoard for the visualization output. Here, you can see the accuracy, bias summaries, cross-entropy, and weights. You can also check the mini-graphs.